Good afternoon. My name is Elian Ramos, and I'm your host. This Friday is the 46th anniversary of Earth Day, and around the world, there's organizations and communities and individuals who are getting ready for celebrating our Pachamama. But beyond the celebration, there is something even bigger that is happening, in that everyone who really cares about the earth should be aware. And this is why we're here. I have a group of experts here, environmental experts, who are going to be talking about what's been going on in leading on to Friday. And they're going to share why you need to care about this. My experts are, I have Mariana Panuncio, who is the Director of Climate Change for the Latin American and Caribbean region for the World Wildlife Fund. How are you, Mariana?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having us.
And next to Mariana, I have Keya Chatterjee, who is the Executive Director of the U.S. Climate Action Network. How are you, Keya?
I'm great.
And then on the other screen, I have Rudy Zamora, who is the Program Director for the League of Conservation Voters, Chispa. And we're going to be hearing about them, about these topics. So why don't we start with you guys telling us a little bit about what you do in your organizations, or what your organization does.
Great, yeah. I'll start. So I'm at the U.S. Climate Action Network. We are a network of 170 plus organizations that work to promote climate action. So, and in fact, World Wildlife Fund and League of Conservation Voters are both members of our Big Tent network. So we are about a third environmental and conservation groups, about a third faith groups that are coming to this issue from a moral perspective, and about a third immigration rights, civil rights, social justice grassroots groups that work on this issue as a justice issue, a core justice issue for the work that they do. And so we're a Big Tent organization that's really focused on the U.S. and how we move the U.S. and how we are also a good ally with the grassroots communities all around the world as we move forward towards a just transition and climate justice here in the United States.
Nice. Mariana?
So hello everybody. So as Elian said, my name is Mariana Panuncio, and I coordinate our climate change work for Latin America and the Caribbean for WWF. So WWF is an organization that has a presence in over 100 countries, and with that we bring truly a global perspective on climate change issues. My role is to work with our global network, as well as the presence that we have in over 15 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, to bring the concerns that we have in Latin America in terms of how climate change is impacting Latin America, but also the opportunities that a different form of development that addresses climate change could bring to the region, bringing that to inform our work on the ground, as well as that perspective, the Latin American perspective, to the global discussions on climate change, and also here in the U.S., given that we are working increasingly closely with the Latino community to bring the pan-Latin voice to the climate debate.
Yeah, and it's all interrelated anyway, no? So the amazing job you're doing. Thank you for being here. And then, Rudy, tell us a little bit about what you do at LCV.
So some of the work that we're doing here at the League of Conservation Voters, specifically with the Chispa Nevada program, is we're talking to Latino families in the state of Nevada to educate them about the Clean Power Plan. We're talking about renewable energy, and we're hoping to engage Latino families to take a bigger stance on taking climate change as an opportunity for them to stand up and make sure that they have a voice at the table when big decision makers are making decisions that are going to affect our communities of color here locally and nationally.
Wonderful. We need that more than ever right now, right? So let's start with the questions. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So let me start with Mariana. Mariana, this is, we mentioned it's the 46th anniversary of Earth Day. So why don't you put it into perspective for us? Why is Earth Day so important? And also, why is it important to pay special attention to what is happening on this Earth Day, this Friday?
Well, ultimately, the kind of life that we have is linked to the earth. And I think this is nowhere more evident right now than what we are experiencing with climate change, where as a result of our collective emissions, we are having an impact on the climate that governs this earth as a whole. This particular Earth Day is very important because last December, 195 countries reached a historic agreement to address climate change. They committed collectively that we are going to bend right now the curve or the trajectory in which we are now headed, that we collectively, all of the governments of the world are going to keep the temperature rise that right now we're seeing to below 1.5 degrees, and that is going to entail, and they're all committed to literally a transformation in terms of how our economies and our societies are organized so that we can have an equitable and prosperous future, but that it's also low carbon and prepared for the impacts of climate change that we are already experiencing and will be experiencing. So this agreement was tremendously important. It's the result of decades of work. But the challenge before us is to make that agreement a reality. And so what we had on April 22nd is a very important time when all of the governments of the world are going to come together again on Earth Day, hopefully most of them to sign the agreement, to basically show once again their political will to make that commitment a reality. And some of them even might bring what is called the instruments of ratification, basically showing that they're going to ratify it nationally, which is ultimately what we need countries to do if that agreement is going to come into force. So it's a very important political signal, and also a show that governments are going to go back home and actually ratify the agreement so that we have what is needed to bring the agreement ultimately into force in the coming year, which is at least 55 countries representing 50% of emissions, global emissions, so that this agreement becomes legally binding. The other thing that is going to be very important is not only that we have nice signatures and a renewed commitment to bring this into force, but also basically very concrete messages of governments committing to implementing action. We know right now the trajectory that we're in is not going to keep us below 2 degrees, let alone 1.5 degrees. We know we're headed for something that will not respond to the commitment that the governments made in Paris. So what we want to see is messages, and we all need to be hearing out for this, messages from governments of what they're going to do, not in 5 years, not in 10 years, but what they are going to be doing in the next 5 years to really decarbonize our economies, prepare us for impacts, and how they're going to ramp up their ambition so that we really deliver on the vision of Paris.
And we were all together in Paris. You both attended the COP. You were actually part of the talks, and so we had there all of the largest CO2 emitters present in the discussions. The United States, China, India, the European Union, all of these. So what would you say are the highest priorities for the countries that took part in these talks, and also to, where do the priorities differ from what the activists and the organizations that were there, and also where did they meet after the talks? What difference did the COP21 make? And that anyone can say. You guys were both there, so.
Sure. I mean, I think what we saw in Paris was that every country's priority was to make this transition off of fossil fuels. We struggled a little bit with the justice-oriented language throughout the talks, and making sure that a just transition stayed in there, making sure that gender equality and equity was really a core part of the agreement. But we came out with more than I personally thought we could get. On all of these fronts. And so this was, I often, I go to a lot of these meetings, as does Mariana, and, what happens a lot is I drink green tea normally, and then usually they're 2-week meetings, so usually about halfway through week 1, I start drinking black tea because I'm getting stressed out, I haven't slept, and then by week 2, I'm drinking coffee. So this meeting was totally different. I was drinking green tea the whole way through. The text was getting stronger and stronger each step of the way. Countries really were coming together in a way that I hadn't seen before. And that is the key signal that I took out of Paris. It's not enough. And in fact, it's really important to note that the agreement itself says it's not enough. concedes that it's not enough, says this is totally insufficient to the task at hand at getting a just transition, but we are starting here and we all agree on what the goal is. And so now what we've done is we've taken away this argument that people had that was never right, that was like, oh, we're not going to act till other countries act. We've taken that away because we've said very clearly all the countries are acting, and every country has said that for themselves in their own voice with their own commitments. Those commitments are insufficient, but we all know that everyone has this shared moral obligation, that everyone is in it to say, in it together and saying we can do this, we can do it together. And there is a willingness for the first time that I've seen really to take on the vested interest in the fossil fuel industry that would otherwise prevent us from taking this step together as a global community. And that's a big change. So where we are today is very different from where we were 6 months ago, and now it's up to us because we've just codified this bottom-up approach. You know, it's not top-down, it's bottom-up. Every country comes up with their own, and it's up to us as citizens, as civil society, to step up to our own moral obligation and bring some accountability to the system, even as we design in the next formal steps what the formal accountability systems will be.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else wants to add anything to that?
Maybe
okay,
one, I wanted to see whether Rudy wanted to say something, but maybe what I would compliment to what Keya said is that clearly if we got 195 countries in, is because everybody sees a greater advantage of being in than being out. As Keya said, there is a recognition. I think that long is gone the time when people thought they could be out of this problem by not engaging. We know we're all in it, and we know that a collective response is needed, and that everybody needs to be part of it. I think one of the key challenges is how we are going to have both a combination of country leadership or individual country leadership as well as cooperation, as Keya was saying, so that we really do this in a way that allows the countries that have historically contributed most to the problem really taking the lead in this effort, but actually countries that right now, and I can say that for Latin America, right now, the investments that Latin America and the rest of the world make in the next 5, 10, 15 years are going to determine our trajectory for the next decades, which is when we actually need to get off this path. So I think that a part of the challenge that we see and that we saw in the agreement is this recognition that we all need to be in it, the recognition that we need to get off this path and onto a different path that hopefully, as Keya was saying, is going to respond not just to climate concerns, but actually ultimately a better development for everybody. But how this is going to work out, how governments are going to cooperate, how quickly this is going to happen, those are all of the key issues that still need to be resolved. And while we all feel like we've got something that is a basis for very strong action, how this is going to work out, part of it is the fine letter of the agreement that will need to be worked out in the coming years, but also ultimately is how this is going to be implemented. And this is where the rub, this is where the real challenge is.
Yeah, and that's where the real work really happens, right? So you guys mentioned something that caught my attention. This is a show that the people who are watching the show are obviously very civically minded, and they, if you follow me online, you know that I'm going to be talking about more issues than Vogue, right? But I wanted, you both mentioned the importance of regular people like me to get involved in these and to put pressure on these people. So, but one of the things that I find is that when we talk about the environment, it's usually very, it tends to be grandiose, big words, big concepts. And so what are some examples that you can give people watching who may not be so well versed as you are, examples that go beyond the weather, for people to understand why they need to pay attention, what the implications are for our everyday life. Why should we care? If anyone, let's have Rudy answer, because he's being a little quiet there.
Awesome. It's a perfect question for us. Here at Chispa and League of Conservation Voters, we engage with the communities day in and day out. And one of the things that we try to resonate with the community is the high percentage of asthma, especially in Latino children. 40% of Latino children suffer from asthma, and asthma is the #1 leading cause for why they're not going to school. So we try to connect the dots to a more local level and to a more personal level on why things like climate change are important. Like you said, a lot of the times we use big terms and language that our community doesn't resonate with. So we try to break that down and do an education piece to where they know that asthma is caused by all these changes that are going on. And asthma is not only a health issue, but it's also something that's making our kids lose days in school, which is affecting the education level that our communities are obtaining. So we're doing a lot of things to make sure that we're having those conversations so that the language that we're using is something our community understands.
And also that, to show the intersections between different issues, because it's all connected, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the great work. So we also spoke recently about the effects of how our poor populations, our campesino families, the indigenous people, our communities bear the brunt of all of these damages and all of these effects of the weather or the climate. So this is a basic social justice issue. What can we do to help these communities? I know Chispa is doing some stuff. What are other things that we can do to help these communities?
Other
Mariana?
things that we can do, I can go ahead. Other things that we can do is ensuring that our families have a voice at the table. I think it's important that when decision makers are making these big decisions, that we have not only our communities have the opportunity to show up to these meetings. A lot of the times these meetings are set up at times where our families are either dropping off the kids at schools or they're working, and it's not something that they can take the time off of work in order to show up to this. So we need to ensure that meetings are accessible to everyone and not just the elite community where we want to hear certain voices, but that it's really open to the public, especially communities of color. And secondly, encourage our families to tell their stories and how they're being affected by climate change, because the story of self and the stories that we tell elected officials and the people making these decisions for us are the ones that are going to be changing their minds, and they're going to be looking at the reality that we have to face on a daily basis as communities of color.
Mariana, you wanted to say something before?
Well, I think that what we need to understand is when we're talking about climate change issues and the vulnerability that we're seeing of basically not only just rural communities but low-income communities in general, what we're seeing is the expression of ultimately deep-seated problems and inequality that has been around for a long time. It's just that with climate change, this is getting exacerbated. And so people who are already having a vulnerability, that gets even worse under a context of climate change. So what we need to understand is what we're talking ultimately is about a social justice agenda and an environmental justice agenda that will result in people not being exposed as badly and not getting the support when these impacts hit them. So for example, in the context of extreme events, when we are getting floods, it is ultimately the people who are in the lowland areas that get hit first, and they are the ones that unfortunately don't have the support to then bounce back. So what we're talking about is at the local level, providing, preparing, doing different, getting involved in better planning so that people are not ultimately as exposed, but we're talking about better federal support so that when the disaster strikes, they get ultimately better help. We're seeing in Central America right now, the drought that is hitting that region, we're seeing the problem of a system that is not providing farmers who have already endured a lot of challenges. Now they're getting hit again with climate change. So we're talking about better preparedness. We're talking about better support for them to be able to plant the next year. So ultimately, what I'm trying to say is that this is not an issue about short-term fixes. That is why it's so important what Rudy was explaining, for people to be able to engage in these dialogues, not over short-term fixes, but ultimately about local priorities, local development priorities, ultimately about state priorities and priorities at the national level.
Mm-hmm. And the beauty of this work is that you can see the impact, you can see the turnaround in people's attitudes and in people's behavior also when you start talking to them in a real way like this. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen on the on the on the legal side of things. Right now, we have the Supreme Court recently decided to hold a key part of what you guys wanted to present as part of the agreement, which is the Clean Power Plan that President Obama approved. So what effect does that decision of the Supreme Court have in terms of the progress that is already been made in signing the deal? What's the effect of this? Keya, can you talk about that for a little bit?
Sure. So technically they put a stay on the Clean Power Plan, or a pause. I actually don't think it's going to have very much effect for a few reasons. One, I think we already see a lot of states are moving forward, regardless of a pause. Second, the Clean Power Plan as a plan, what it does is it reduces pollution from the electricity sector, from the big power plants. And it really starts in 2020 to do that. And so a pause that happens between now and June, when the court case happens in the DC Circuit Courts, is really before it was meant to take place in any case. And so there isn't necessarily any impact on the emissions reductions we will get. And the third thing I'll just say is that everyone I know is very, very confident. Legal experts are very confident. We have that we will prevail in this case. The oral arguments are coming up on June 3rd. There have been some changes to the composition of the Supreme Court since the pause was put in place that should make us more optimistic about how the Supreme Court would view this rule. And fundamentally, it is a rule that benefits society and that's necessary. It's actually, it is a step forward that we need to take to regulate greenhouse gas pollution. But for most people, they're shocked, and I find when I talk to people in communities, they're shocked to find out that we aren't already regulating the pollution that's causing climate change. People find that shocking, but we're not doing it yet. This is the rule that will we're doing it a little bit in cars, I should say, but this is the rule that really starts to do it from the power plants. And I'm totally confident that the rule will prevail. And the slogan we've been saying because of this term "stay" is that you can stay the Clean Power Plan for a few months, but you can't stay our communities. You can't stay this transition that's already happening in our communities. This transition is happening. We are starting to get off of dirty fuels. Jobs are being created in the solar industry, in the wind industry. It's already happening, and the question for us is how do we make sure that we protect low-income communities and communities of color as we do it? And that's one of the beautiful parts of the Clean Power Plan, is that it requires this environmental justice analysis in each and every state. And so what people can do if they want to get involved is make sure that their state is continuing to move forward regardless of what's happening. And if they're not, participate in democracy. This is a great opportunity to get involved and to show your state leaders, whether it's on Twitter, which I know many of your followers probably engage on. That's a great place to find your local elected officials, find your attorney general, and tell them that you think we should be tackling the pollution that's leading to climate change and is causing problems with asthma, problems in agriculture, and in all the things that affect us in our core, our food and our water.
Mm-hmm. And hopefully we'll get the next justice also to be sworn in soon, so that we can get these. Hopefully they'll be positive towards this issue. Mariana, I want you to add some to it, because one of the biggest arguments that people who are against clean power or the transition to clean power, one of their bigger arguments is that this is going to be hurtful to the economy, especially bad for communities, of color, for our communities. What would you say about this to these people?
Well, I would say two main things. The first thing is that we need to recognize that if we are going to leave the way in which we have organized our economies in the last 200 years behind, we need to recognize that there is going to be a transition process. And we need to recognize that that's going to have implications for families who are going to need to change from jobs that they currently have with fossil fuel industries to a different kind of jobs. But that is where the opportunity that we have is to do this in an intentional way. And that means that governments be involved in a process to make sure that those people who are going to be transitioning from those jobs are not just left behind by be it mining companies or be it fossil fuel companies that just shut down and leave them hanging, but actually that there is a process to transition them into the jobs of the future, and that there is training and that there is support. So we need to recognize that there is an element of a just transition that is absolutely essential, and we need to be deliberate about it rather than just letting it happen. Now, having said that, if we're going to go from economies of the world that are based on fossil fuels to those that are based on renewable energies, we need to recognize that renewable economies powered by renewable energy present a huge opportunity, and we are already seeing that. The renewable energy industry in 2015 was employing almost 8 million people worldwide. That is a very significant level of employment, and the fact that it has been growing very rapidly from 2014 to 2015, that increased. It increased from basically almost 20%. The other piece is that when you compare fossil fuel industries and renewable energy industries, when you compare per gigawatt of energy produced, renewable energy employs many more people than fossil fuel industries does. So if you're talking about engines of development, while this may vary by renewable energy type, what you're talking is potentially a source of greater employment than basically the current model. The other piece of it is we're talking about more investment. We have seen this in Latin America, where, for example, a country like Nicaragua has topped the ranks of countries in the region in attracting renewable energy investment. That is very significant, because it means that it can be, particularly for countries that want to develop, a new opportunity to attract capital. And that is true for developing countries as it is for developed countries like the United States. The other piece is better health. As Rudy was explaining, I mean, we're talking about avoided health costs. We're talking about reduced number of deaths, less sickness to preventable diseases, and you're talking ultimately about avoided health costs. That is also better for development. And then you get the added bonus of we're addressing climate change in the process, and we're getting into a new economy. So when people say this is bad for the economy, I urge everybody to look at the bigger picture and see the multiple benefits that we can get from shifting to a modern model of development that is actually attuned to the reality of our planet today and what's coming in the coming decades.
Nice. And so what are your organizations doing in terms of, because it sounds to me like there's a lot of scaling up and training and awareness raising that needs to be happening. What are your organizations doing to particularly in our communities, to help start that process? And anyone can start. Rudy, let's go with you.
All right. Here at LCV, the Chispas across the country, we're working on getting resolutions passed at a local level. I know here in Nevada, we're looking at passing a county resolution, working with the county to start passing a resolution at a county level, but also at the city of Las Vegas level. So we're working with the communities so that we can push that information out and hopefully have a resolution passed, as well as we're doing the same thing in Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico. So we're working across the country to push this out.
Mariana and Keya?
So we're talking about pretty massive system change in a very short period of time. And so one of the things that I look at, so we have these 170 member organizations, many of whom the individuals can go and join. Individuals can go and join WWF and the League of Conservation Voters. And so there's a member for everybody that's aligned with your interests. And so one thing we do is just try to encourage people to join the movement in whatever way they find sings to them and is real and resonant for them, based on their own identities, whether you identify as a mom or a Latino or an elderly citizen. We have members that work with each of these communities, and I would really encourage people to go find a community where they can really get a little bit more involved and be together with other people. There are three things that we're always looking at in our membership that can create massive system change. You need three elements in place. You need to have an activist base. You need to have a permissive majority that will allow the activists to have what they want, and you need to have political leadership. So we're always looking across our membership to make sure all of those things are in place so that we can get big system change. And for the big system change, the economics also have to be right. So to get back to what Mariana was saying, we're really lucky. In 16 states, we're already cost competitive with the old forms of energy, the fossil fuels. And so we need to keep that in place and also make sure our members are able to really, cultivate this sense of activism, make sure the middle of the country is permissive, and get political leadership in place.
Mm-hmm. And Mariana?
Well, maybe let me bring the Latin American perspective into this. So as I was explaining before, we have a presence in over 15 countries in Latin America, and we're talking about a huge diversity of contexts and situations, but I think that some of the elements that we see, and I like how Keya described it, is setting up the conditions for a large change. And so part of what we do is awareness raising about this issue is basically, as you were saying, Eliana, translating this information that seems so abstract and distant into very much the context in each of these countries so that people can see where the opportunities for a better type of development, be it for Colombia, for Guatemala, for Mexico, for Paraguay, or for Chile. So that is one issue. The other element is engaging on policy. So a lot of countries right now are making very significant decisions with regards to their long-term investments, and they're really setting themselves up both in terms to in where they're going to go in terms of emissions, but also starting to prepare critical sectors like agriculture, their coastal infrastructure. And so there is a lot, it sounds very abstract, but there's a lot of right now policies that are getting set up in the region, and providing technical input into that process is very important. But then it's coming very right down to the ground, is actually addressing the needs of people at the local level. So one of the issues where we see is on agriculture, working with coffee producers and trying to address, what adaptation measures could be taken in Peru, or working with cattle ranchers in Colombia and trying to get them prepared to the impacts of climate change. Those are some of the examples on the ground. And then the last piece is actually getting the region to work together. And so one of the areas that we're really excited that we're engaging more on is how we can try to get more renewable energy coming into the region by having countries not only to working in isolation, but actually working together to actually attract better investments. So ultimately, there are a lot of moving parts. There is a lot of diversity, but what I want to say is that there is a lot of opportunity. And maybe that brings me to the last point, which is actually telling the story and creating this collaboration and the sense that we're in it together, as Keya was saying, not just globally, but for the Americas. And so in that sense, we're really starting to work more closely with other organizations that have a long history of working with the Latino community here, and really show how much we can do together if the Latino community at large in all of the Americas works together. And so we're increasingly working on this with Latino groups here in the US and linking with our work in Latin America, and we're really excited about what we could do if we work more closely together.
Yeah, and if you think about it, this is exactly where the world is going, this world of collaboration, of open social media, where anyone can jump in and help and talk and give their opinion and do their part. And so if we want to do our part as, regular people, like me to help you in your organizations to push all of these forward? What do we need to do? Where can we find you online? How do we join your campaigns? Tell me about it. Anyone, Rudy, let's start with you.
So you can check our work that we're doing at lcv.org /Chispa, and you can connect with all the states where we have a Latino program. Some of the things that we're doing locally, we have an awesome program called Promotores. Promotores are people that come into our offices and get trained to go back into the communities to talk about climate justice and different injustices that are going on day to day in our community. So we just graduated 22 promotores here in Nevada, and we've graduated a couple more throughout the country. And we're working with them to ensure that they're out there spreading the message and continuing to work with the community and spread that message on the clean power plant, solar energy, renewable energy, and everything else, and having them get involved. The other thing is we have events. We have events every month. For example, we have events locally this week for Earth Day. We have some here in Nevada. We have them in Arizona. We have them in different states throughout the country. And lastly, I mean, just going into our local offices, whether it's an LCV office, whether it's a Chispa office, and just coming in so we can touch base. We have so many things that the community can get involved, whether it's a simple phone bank or just ensuring that the right message is being spread in the community and not the climate deniers message that is what we mostly hear in the communities. So we need to ensure that our communities, whether it's the communities of color or our communities, have that right message to go out and make sure that it's spreading the correct message.
So you hear Rudy, just don't call him during the hangout. Please wait wait a couple of minutes. All right, Mariana.
Well, definitely you can check out our website, worldwildlife.org, and there you can actually see both our work with Latino communities. You can go to our Climatico website that is part of our overarching WWF website, but you can also through that get to see our work in Latin America. You can also join us and you know, there are action alerts, there are actions that we spread out, and we really encourage you to engage with us as well as engage with our partners, because it's not just by working with WWF, it's by actually creating a stronger activist base, as Keya was saying, by working all together. So yes, I think there are lots of opportunities for action if we actually coordinate it better and if we get more people on board. So hopefully many of you will join, any and all of us.
Mm-hmm. And if you go to the Climatico.us website, they have so much amazing content that you cannot find anywhere. There's content about Latin America and what is going on in the different countries and how all of these things are affecting Latinos here in the U.S. It's an amazing site, so I recommend it, certainly. Keya, tell us about where to find you.
So our website is usclimatenetwork.org. And you have to click on members or /members, and you will get a long list of 170 organizations that are each amazing, that are in your communities, that you can join, that you should join, so that you can be in community with people as an activist. But you don't even have to wait for that. If you want to do something right now, you can just go ahead and look up your elected officials and tweet at them that you want climate action now. You know, use a hashtag like #ActOnClimate, and just get started. You know, in whatever way is comfortable for you. If you want to, I encourage people to join our member organizations, because that's where you'll get a sense of community, and that makes it easier to stay in the movement. And so it's so important that people do that if you can in any way. But get started by tweeting. Get started by doing things in your own life, and you know, the way you use electricity, and the way you get around, and the way you consume and get food. But most importantly, join one of our member organizations, because they would love to have you, and you'll get a lot out of the sense of community.
Can I add one more thing? Maybe just building on what Keya just said. One is to talk and talk to others and be part of a community, like Keya was saying. The other one, I would say, in addition to those, and I think it's implicit in what Rudy and all of us have been saying, and Keya was referring to this, is how we buy has a huge impact on the signals that we're giving. But ultimately, we know in this very important year is also to vote. And so, so this is a year in which, with a drum roll of Twitter messages, messages on Facebook, but also ultimately what we do at the ballot box, we can make a huge difference. So, so we have lots of different ways in which we can make our voice heard, and we need to use all possible channels to do it.
So there you have it, folks. You can join the organizations, you can join the efforts that they're doing, but also show up at the ballot box and make sure that you're shopping responsibly with companies that are, you know, respectful of the environment. And then, you know, tweet at your representative. Keep putting that pressure on them and on the world leaders, really, because we want to make sure that this, whatever is happening this Friday, is not just a follow-up. We want to make sure that this is an agreement and that they abide to this agreement. So even after Friday, keep on tweeting all the world leaders. You know, Obama is online. All of these world leaders are online. Make sure that they hear your voice. And with that, I'm going to leave you. We went a little bit over time, but I want to thank my guests, Keya, Mariana, and Rudy, for, you know, for their time and for their wisdom. My God, you guys know so much about this. I feel like I go to school every time I talk to you. But thank you so much for being here. I'm going to be leaving you with this. Please use the hashtag Earth Day on Friday and all through today. We're going to be tweeting the link to the video for this. So if you missed it, don't worry. Or if you want to send it to somebody, you can share it too. So hasta la próxima. Thank you so much for watching.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Bye.